Hi, grades. Today we are going to finish our World War One PowerPoint. I kind of abandoned it for a while and I thought, okay, let me try this again. So let's open this up. The last time in the last uh, um, video we did the main causes of World War One. Um, we spoke about militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, treaty, reparations, assassination. We went into detail about the main causes of the war, main meaning MAIN. And then we also spoke about the assassination. So it would be Maina. Then we had a conversation about trench warfare, how the conditions in the trenches affected soldiers because of this new type of warfare. You couldn't just fight like people had in the past. You had to dig out these little holes in the ground called trenches. And it took a very long time for the war to be over because if you like went over the top, you would just get shot immediately. So, yeah, they would sacrifice like lots of people just to go like a few meters of ground, get a few meters of ground. So now we're getting to the end of the war with the Treaty of Versailles. So towards the end of 1918, Germany was in a very bad position because their allies, which was Austria, Hungary, and Italy, and I think the Ottoman Empire as well, they were already out of the war. They were either defeated majorly, had major losses, and then were trying to negotiate peace treaties. In Germany itself, the economy was suffering, which means many of the German people were very, very poor. All the money went into the war effort, so that meant that at the end of the day, the German currency was sort of like monopoly money, and it wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. People were really, really suffering with inflation and high prices, and the money just essentially being worthless. And there was also the possibility that if they continue to fight, they're going to face great loss of life. And there was already like millions of people dead at this point. One of the most deadliest wars in history was World War One, or at the time they called it the Great War because they didn't know there was going to be a World War Two, so they just called it the Great War. So by 11 November 1918, Germany agreed to something called an armistice, which means they agreed to stop fighting. And the Treaty of Versailles was drawn up in 1919. So it's called the Treaty of Versailles because there's a palace in France called the Versailles, which we will speak about again in grade 10 with French Revolution. And they went to go and sign the treaty there. But the thing is, there were three big leaders at this meeting, like, with drawing up the treaty. The leader of the USA, the leader of France, and the leader of Great Britain. Not the Queen, or the King at that stage, I guess. Not the King, but the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Their names are a bit complicated, so I'm just going to leave that out. The leader of the USA was Woodrow Wilson, but the other two, I keep forgetting their names. It's George Clemenceau and David something something. But it's not important for you to know their names. You just need to know that they were the ones in the room where it happens, and they were drawing up the treaty. Germany was not really invited to this meeting, so they just kind of had to show up and sign the treaty at the end of the day. So the treaty basically established if Germany wants peace, then they need to agree to these conditions. So you kind of don't have a choice because if you don't agree to the conditions, then the war's just gonna continue. So, what were the terms of this treaty? Germany was required to pay something called reparations, which means payback for war damages. They had to disarm, that means their military had to be disbanded, their navy had to be disbanded, the air force had to be disbanded. Basically, they didn't want Germany to have an army at all. Um, Germany had to give up lots and lots of territory. I'll show you exactly how much territory they had to give up. and they lost all of their overseas colonies. So if you think back to Scramble for Africa, you'll remember that Germany was one of the countries that got a few colonies in Africa, like for example Namibia. And with the end of this war, they had to give that territory up again to Britain and France. Germany was also forced to accept full blame for the war, which was known as the War Guilt Clause. So this was considered very unfair because I don't know if you guys remember the first part of this unit where we discussed why the war started. And you'll remember it was actually a fight between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. But at the end of the day, the country that gets punished the most is Germany. They have to accept full blame for the war. They're the ones that started everything. So they are getting severely, severely punished by the treaty. The treaty also established something called the League of Nations, which was like the precursor to what we today know as the United Nations, where all the countries in Europe basically got together and said, okay, we don't want to have another war like this because literally so many people died and so many people were injured. It was brutal because this was like modern warfare. People were throwing poison gas and people were getting impaled with shrapnel from grenades, and this has never happened before in history, like with all these new technologies like tanks and things like that. The death toll was just unimaginable, and people thought, yo, this is the war to end all wars. We cannot have another war like this. So League of Nations was established. Basically most of the countries in Europe got together to prevent further wars. We rather going to talk with each other, going to try and not have another war like this again. However, the treaty was a major factor in the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party and the start of World War II. So it didn't actually help prevent war at all. Many German people saw the treaty as a stab in the back by their leaders because they still believed they could win. They still believed they could go out there and fight this war and win this war. And they feel like their leaders gave up too soon. So they have that anger because they feel they've been stabbed in the back. Now, the conditions of the treaty were very, very harsh economically for Germany as well, which meant they were facing hectic economic troubles, which means they had to pay, I think it was 6.6 million pounds, and they only finished paying that off fairly recently, I think in the 2000s sometimes. I must double check the date of that. But the money that they had to pay for the war essentially was bankrupting their country. They faced deep humiliation because Germany was the one that was blamed for everything that happened during the war, and this leads to resentment. So a lot of German people were very angry at the treaty. They felt that the treaty was being forced on them, and that resentment made them want to sort of get revenge. And this wanting to get revenge kind of leads to the rise of the Nazi Party, which we will do in grade 9. So, what are the actual conditions of the treaty? So, one of the first conditions was the surrender of all German colonies. Number two is the return of Alsace-Lorraine to France. So, a couple of years before World War One or the Great War, Germany and France got in a little tussle, and a piece of land called Alsace-Lorraine was taken by Germany. And then after World War One, it was basically like you have to give it back to France. Um, then other areas of land was given to other countries. I'm not going to go into detail about that because it's so difficult to pronounce all these things. So just going to skip three, four, and five, six as well, and I'm going to skip. Go to number seven, the Saar. So Saar is kind of like a area of land that is on the border between France and Germany, and the Allies basically put a clause in the treaty that said they allowed to have troops in the Saar at all times. So kind of think of it like you're in your room and your mom is there watching you all the time. So you can't really do anything. Um, so that is also something that was caused much resentment. So this is just a image to show you about how much land Germany actually had to give up, Germany and Austria-Hungary. You can see that Austria-Hungary as an empire just broke up completely. Broke up into Austria, Hungary. You can see in the one picture how big it is, and then the second picture how small it is. And you get Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Romania, Moldova, Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, Poland, East Prussia. So all that little bits of land was broken up because of this treaty. Like they had to give it up. Um, so yeah. So in terms of military and economic problems created by the treaty, is that Germany had to face complete demilitarization and a 15-year occupation of the Rhineland. The German reparations, there it is, billion. Oh, I thought it was million. I guess it was billion, which would be 13 trillion in 2021 currency. So this is when I made this PowerPoint. I just never did a video on it. And like I said, I think they only paid that off like fairly recently, like in the 2000s. There was a ban on the union of Germany and Austria. So Germany and Austria together was like a powerhouse. They were like the dream team. So this treaty basically said, you're not allowed to be friends anymore. You guys can't be allies. You guys have to fight all your battles independently. There was an acceptance of Germany's guilt in causing the war. There was a provision for the trial of the former Kaiser and other war leaders. So basically, the king of Germany, in other words. There was limitation of Germany's army to 100,000 men. Now, the difference here is that Germany's army was one of the most, like the massive army in Europe at the time. Like they were on par with some of the other big heavy hitters like France, Britain, Russia. They had a lot of people in their army, and now they had to reduce their army to something like 10% of what they actually had before. They can't have any conscription, so they can't force people to fight in their army. They were not allowed to have any tanks. They were not allowed to have any heavy artillery. So heavy artillery is like big bombs. They were not allowed to have poison gas. They're not allowed to have aircraft, and they're not allowed to have airships. Now, the reason they were so strict on Germany's army is that they did not want Germany to have the ability to wage another war. So they thought by essentially cutting off the arms and legs of Germany, they are going to make Germany super weak and there's not going to be another war. So that was the whole idea behind the strictness with the demilitarization. The German Navy was only allowed to have six pre-dreadnought battleships, and they were limited to a maximum of six light cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 12 torpedo boats. They were not allowed to have submarines. So it's insane when you think about how big of a heavy hitter Germany was before the war, and now they're basically a little mouse. They can't do anything. So before we finish off, you can see a little cartoon there. Terms the German people must pay for all the damage to civilians on land and sea or from the air. You can see the vultures in the back there in the picture, and you can see the German guy looking at the treaty in horror. um, so, what's your ticket to leave? Which countries do you think benefited the most from the Treaty of Versailles? Which country benefited the least? And do you think the treaty was fair? You can drop your answers down in the comments. All the best for the exams, grade 8. Remember, this exam's coming up is not just World War One. It is also going to have your Scramble for Africa in it as well. So make sure you go back and you revise your term 3 work and your term 4 work. And yeah, I hope you are ready for grade 9 because we pick up right here where we left off. All the best and enjoy your rest of your day.